So we're going to talk today about lifting the COVID cloud. So I shouldn't say hopefully you've experienced this, because I hope none of you have experienced this, but I'm guessing that some of you have experienced this personally, or you have some employees who have experienced this and you really want to know what you can do about it. So that's what we're going to talk about, because we really want to, as we're moving into this new normal, regain our focus and our motivation at work if we haven't been feeling that lately. So let's start off by the definitions. What is the COVID cloud? Some of you have heard things like brain fog, a cloud. And let me make a distinction here. There is a brain fog that is associated with a medical outcome of those people who have had COVID. And there's all kinds of research on that. Today, we're not talking about people who have necessarily had COVID, but anybody, whether they've had COVID or not, who have just lived through this past 16, 17 months of dealing with COVID and how that has affected us. So how I would define the COVID cloud is that you have some cognitive inefficiencies. Maybe your memory isn't as good as it used to be. You have trouble thinking, you have trouble focusing and paying attention. I find that I think of words in my head and they just don't come out quite the way that I want them to. And so some of that is some cognitive inefficiency. It's also some emotional fatigue. People describe having just a sense of heaviness, anxiety. Sometimes it's confusion. What's next? What are we doing? What's going on? Even joylessness, obviously some sadness, to some degree, some anger, and just that feeling of being blah. And a lot of that cognitive inefficiency and emotional fatigue can actually lead to a lack of motivation. People are suggesting that they're uninspired. They feel disconnected. I've heard lots more people talk about being burned out. There's significant research about people being burned out. And there's a new term in social science research that people are languishing. It's sort of that bridge between, I'm motivated and excited about something and I'm depressed. I'm not really clinically depressed, but I'm not excited about something. It's just that in the middle, like, and they feel aimless and stagnant. And so that's how I would define the COVID cloud. And I'd really love to hear from you. And so we have a poll question coming up to see what you've experienced. So the first question is, have any of the following experiences been heightened for you over the past year? And in this one, you can select all that apply. So have you had any impaired memory, trouble thinking, or trouble paying attention? By the way, this poll question is completely anonymous, so I have no idea. So if you think I'm going to talk to your boss about your impaired memory, I won't, I promise. And then, have you had any of the following experiences as far as emotional heaviness, anxiety, confusion? And you can scroll down. I'm just going to give you a few seconds to answer that. Okay, so we have lots of impaired memory. I am not alone. This webinar is about me. It's about affirming that I'm not losing my mind. So thank you for that. So several of you are experiencing some impaired memory, lots of trouble thinking, not as much trouble paying attention, which is great, but certainly some emotional heaviness and anxiety, a little less so on the anger and sadness and confusion. And then some lack of motivation at work, about half of you, but a good portion of you are uninspired at work and feel disconnected and are on that verge of burnout, or maybe you are burned out. So let's talk about that a little more. So first of all, I want to talk about why we're cloudy. And there's three primary reasons. There's a number of reasons, but these are the ones that research has shown are really the biggest determinants of this COVID cloud. One is that we have experienced over the last several months this prolonged uncertainty. And I think back to March of that 2020 or 2019? I feel like I've lost a year in here somewhere. And we all got in a room on Lipscomb's campus to talk about, we're going to go on spring break and then we're not going to come back the next week, but we hope we're going to come back the next week. Then over spring break, everything started shutting down, and then suddenly we weren't coming back next week. We're going to come back in the summer, but then we were not going to come back to the fall. So there's been this prolonged uncertainty, and that creates this additional anxiety. What that does is it activates the emotional center of our brains, and that limits our ability to think clearly and make logical decisions. So this overtaxing of our emotional portion of our brains has really caused this mental fatigue, this inability to focus, this inability to think through things logically and clearly. That's affecting our memory. So uncertainty about what's coming next, uncertainty about how you navigate different things. Certainly people have had health concerns and health issues and significant issues with family members and even themselves. So all of this uncertainty has really weighed down on all of us. We've also experienced change overload. Several of you are change makers, you love change, but the past several months, it has been change overload. That can cause excitement in some situations, but in others, especially when it continues and it's constant change, we start to feel unsettled, sometimes overwhelmed. And this can especially affect us as we start to transition back to sort of our new normal. So as things start to open back up and now they might close back again, again, another change that we're starting to experience. And so you've had employees sort of adapt to one way of doing things, and now you're asking them to change again, and you might be asking them to change again in the next several weeks. So this change overload has taxed our brains tremendously. The third primary reason is that many of us are zoomed out. So I appreciate you using Zoom to participate in this webinar. But the interesting thing about Zoom is that it actually taxes our mind to pay that close attention, because typically when you're in a room and you're in a meeting with people, you're looking around and you have things to distract you, but you can kind of focus on a person because it's not like the one thing you have to focus on, but all of a sudden now we just have like this one face we're having to focus on entirely. We're trying to pick up verbal cues and nonverbal cues that, and sometimes you're seeing some nonverbal cues that you don't want to see. Also, you're picking up, if you have your camera on some of your cues that you don't see when you're speaking just in a regular meeting scenario, because you can't see yourself. So lots of taxing on our brains. And this is particularly concerning when you have connectivity issues and lots of distractions. And so I think about things like when you have the people who stop because their connectivity goes in and out, and you're trying to pay attention, but you miss 3 or 4 words in there, or your dog starts barking, or you get a package delivery. So there's all these distractions. And quite honestly, we're just zoomed out. So these are the primary reasons why we feel cloudy, is because we're going about our normal day-to-day work, but there's all these other things that are being processed by our brain. And the personal example that I can think of that is, I've been teaching for close to 20 years. I go into a classroom, I know exactly what I'm going to do. I get into my classroom and I just make it happen. This year, now we had Zoom. I had some students online. I had some students in the class. So every day you walk in, and instead of just thinking, what am I going to teach today? And what are we going to learn in class? It's, okay, is the technology going to work? Are my speakers going to work for the video? Are people actually going to participate in the conversation, because everybody has on masks, everybody's 6 feet apart. So how do you manage all of this? So suddenly you're not just thinking about your job, you're thinking about all these other things going on around you. And so that's why we're feeling all those things that you said you were feeling, as far as exhaustion and fatigue and trouble thinking and a little bit of burnout. So I'd like to understand from you guys, what's your why? So of those things that we just talked about, the prolonged uncertainty, change overload, or being zoomed out, what do you attribute most to why you feel cloudy? So you can only pick one here. All right, so overwhelmingly prolonged uncertainty. And unfortunately, we may be in that cycle for a good bit longer. So let's talk about ways that we can manage that, because based on some new CDC guidelines that were released yesterday, it sounds like we're going to be living with some uncertainty for quite some time. So let's talk about how you can manage your cloud. And I have 6 tips here. The first one, and this has a little bit more to do with your work scenario, but especially those of you who said that you lack some motivation, you're starting to feel burned out. One of the biggest or most well-researched tickets to motivation is to set goals. The key here is to set a goal that pushes you, but something that is achievable, because you don't want to set some great big goal and then you don't achieve it, and that just crushes your motivation further. So set a reasonable goal, something that stretches you a little bit, because accomplishing a goal actually creates more motivation. So setting those goals and being very intentional about that, and making sure that you're breaking down your larger goals into some smaller chunks. So those of you who love to-do lists, and those of you who know me know that I don't like to-do lists because I lose them. I write everything down and then I put them off to the side and then I kind of forget about them. So mine is more of a mental to-do list, but some of you love your to-do list because you have a whole list and you can mark it off and it makes you feel so good that you can mark that off. So break those larger things down into smaller chunks so that you actually have a goal and you feel like you've at least accomplished something. One of the strategies that I've seen recommended is that you take like 1 or 2 things. It's like, these are the things I have to accomplish a day. You do those first, which is the next thing I'm telling you, is to do the hard tasks first. Make sure you get those done. So then at the end of the day, you feel like you've really accomplished something, and that can actually increase your motivation to do other difficult things. So do the hard things first, get the tough stuff out of the way. First of all, you're mentally more capable first thing in the morning, or whatever your prime time is. Some of you it's 10 o'clock, some of you, most of you it's not 1 o'clock, but sometime between that 8 and 10 for most people. Do those hard things first. That way it's not weighing on you the rest of the day and bogging you down, because that can also reduce your motivation, and your other tasks will feel easier. So try that first. If you are still working from home, or even if you're in one of those hybrid situations, or even if you're in the office, but people are kind of coming and going, you can do some co-working scenarios. Maybe you just jump on a call with somebody over lunch and you just chat during lunch. You can talk about work, you can talk about non-work things, but even if it has to be virtually, build some camaraderie with people. It could be, especially if you're working remotely, and some colleagues of mine are doing this. In fact, one colleague works on her dissertation virtually. And so it's just a group. They don't talk to each other. They just get online, because you feel that accountability of somebody working alongside you. You could ask a question if you needed to, but it's really just this co-working, like, I have somebody next to me who's going through the same thing. So co-working is one way to help manage your cloud. Interestingly, and I find this a little bit ironic, just this idea that we've experienced all this change overload, but now I'm telling you to change your routine. Motivation can actually increase when you have something that's called novelty. So I'm doing something different. So much of our work, for many of you, especially in certain fields, your work got stagnant. You're kind of just going in, you're going through the motions, you're doing the same thing every day. Do something that changes that up. Even if it has nothing to do with work, take a different route to work, walk in the afternoon instead of the morning, something that kind of changes your routine, that gets you out of autopilot. So maybe instead of going straight to the office and making your coffee and sitting down and checking your email, maybe you walk around the building first and you go talk to 1 or 2 people, then you go start doing your work. Do something every day to change things up to get you out of that autopilot. The 5th tip is something that I think is probably the most important. One is that you have to step away from this mental taxation that we're all dealing with, even if it's just for a minute. So I find this particularly interesting for those of you who are sitting on Zoom calls all day long, especially if you're working remotely. Being on Zoom taxes our brains more than a traditional meeting. And so if you're just back to back to back online, that's causing a lot of mental fatigue. So schedule time on your calendar where you can take, at least a minute break, ideally more like a 10 or 15-minute break between meetings, so that your brain can actually recover and heal before it has to get active again. So taking that brain break is really important for you. And then finally, and this kind of sounds like a no-brainer, but I think a lot of us, are part of that Protestant work ethic, and, you just got to keep charging, got to keep working hard. It's okay that you're less motivated. We have all survived this, 16-month time period of a lot of change overload and uncertainty that's affecting us mentally and emotionally and motivationally. Understand it's okay to be less motivated. So if you're setting your goals, you're doing your hard tasks first, you're doing the things that you have to get done, focus on those strengths and what you accomplish each day. So it's basically just a step back to say, you know what, it's okay that I'm not at the top of my game. Maybe I'm just going to take a break and move on. And we'll talk about what employers can do in a few minutes, but this is what you can do just on your own to help manage that cloud for yourself. So I do want to talk about, for those of you who manage people or who work in human resources or just have employees around you who may be struggling as well, you may feel like you're in the cloud, but your employees might feel like they're in a cloud too. And the question that I keep seeing in the last few weeks is, how has this pandemic affected that employee-employer relationship? So I'm going to have another poll for you really quickly. Have your experiences changed your expectations about work? So what I'd like to know, and again, this is anonymous, but are you considering a job change? What work scenario would be ideal from you? Would you prefer to work at home? Would you prefer to work in the office, or would you prefer some flexibility to choose or move back and forth from home and the office? And then how important is work flexibility when evaluating future employers? So if you're going to go for a new job and they say you have to be in the office 100% of the time, if that's really important to you, just let me know how important that is to you. So I'll give you a second to answer those questions. All right, so about a third of you are considering a job change, a third are not. And then we've got some maybes in there, like I'm thinking about it, not really ready to pull the trigger, but it's at least crossed my mind. And then I like this, well, I mean, I like any answer because it's your answers, but a quarter of you would prefer to work from home, a little less than that would work from the office full time, but overwhelmingly you're matching America. You want that flexibility to work from home or office. And then that flexibility is very important or somewhat important to you as far as evaluating future employers. So there's some really great data that's just come out. If you've seen any of the articles lately in the Business Journal or in Forbes or Business Week, any of the business magazines, they're calling it the Great Resignation. So according to a recent survey of about 30,000 employees, 95% of them said they are considering a job change. So a little bit higher than you guys. But the primary thing that they say they're looking at is they want some work-life balance, they want more flexibility, or they want more purpose. Now, when you go to, there was a different study that asked their top reasons for turning over. The top reason, 3 and 5, said it was burnout. So if you think about what we've just experienced, that makes perfect sense. So if you work in I'm maybe you've seen this, and I don't know if that's one of your reasons on your termination categories, but that idea that I'm burned out, I need a break, I need to do something different. I've talked to several people who have completely changed careers. They were doing a job, they were very successful in a job, then the pandemic really made them reevaluate what is important to me. And they have completely shifted gears in terms of their career and are doing different things. And part of that is because they really started to get burned out. Part of it is because they don't sense that purpose anymore in what they were doing, or their reasons for doing that job aren't as important to them as they used to be. But burnout is a major factor for turnover. Other reasons cited are limited advancement, pay, and then again, here's this idea of lack of flexibility. Another survey asked people if they would prefer to work at home, and 3 in 10 said they never want to return to an office. So if you think about the dynamics and what that means for our workplaces, that's pretty significant when a third of your workforce says, I don't want to come back. So if you're in commercial real estate, that's not great for you. If you are in facilities and you're worried about office space, that could be good for you because you might have some office space that's freed up. But for all of us, we're trying to figure out what's the best scenario. How do we manage people who don't want to work in the office at all? How do we manage our productivity? How do we manage meetings and getting things done, collaboration, all those things? For most of us, we've worked in an environment where that has been done remotely. And so people are saying, hey, we can do this differently. That's affected education, that's affected knowledge workers, creativity workers. So a big impact to our future workforce. And then 1 in 3 people won't consider an employer that requires full-time on-site work. They don't mind going to the office sometime, but they kind of like that flexibility of I can work from home sometimes. I don't have to be in the office all the time, but I'd kind of like to be in the office occasionally just because it's nice to have that camaraderie and that collaboration. Quite honestly, some people don't want to deal with the commute anymore. So they're saying, you know, it's just easier for me to work from home and I can do it and I can get other things done. Some people, especially our extroverts out there, really would love to be in an office part of the time. Now, different companies are looking at this different ways. And so Morgan Stanley CEO James Gordon says, if you can go to a restaurant in New York City, you can come into the office. So they're really drawing a hard line in the sand. It's like, hey, look, there's no flexibility here. We need everybody in the office. You've got to come back. What a lot of these companies who are drawing that hard line in the sand are seeing is that their attrition rates are going up significantly. So this is going to affect all of us as employers because employees are saying, hey, we've done this remotely with the exception of essential workers. Your hospital staff is not saying this, your grocery staff is not saying this, your elementary school teachers are probably not saying that, although maybe they wish they could say that. So we'll exclude those jobs, but for your knowledge and creativity workers, they're saying, you know what? I could do this remotely and I want to continue to do that remotely. And if I can't, I'm going to find somebody who will let me do that. So the big question for you as employers is what should knowledge workers expect from you? So a couple of things, actually 9 things. Things that, and we can have some arguments later in the Q&A session about what employers owe to employees and what expectations employers can have from employees. But I think at a minimum level, employers need to think about if we don't want the attrition of our key talent, what are the things that we need to do to be able to help them lift the cloud, stay with us, stay motivated, stay productive. So a couple of things that people have cited. One is that if you're going to make big decisions that affect employee work conditions, such as the Morgan Stanley decision, like everybody has to come to work, everybody's in, employees are saying, ask us first. You're making a big decision that affects our livelihood, our work productivity, our work-life balance. So send us a survey, ask us what we think first before you make a decision. It's still ultimately the decision of the business, but get a pulse on what your employees are thinking before you make that big decision. Another thing to think about is to ensure equity. If you're creating policies, especially with flexibility, make sure that you're creating policies that benefit all or at least most of your employees and not just a few. Because what can often happen is, especially some of your lower level employees, sometimes they're not getting the benefit of that flexibility, but some of your higher level employees are. And so there creates this sense of inequity in the workplace. So if you're creating these policies, make sure that you're doing something that provides the most benefit to the most people. Giving autonomy. I read an article that says the 2 keys to getting past this great resignation is autonomy and trust, or I'm sorry, flexibility and trust. And trust is really about that autonomy. I trust you to do the right thing in the absence of being here with me. So all the micromanagers out there are really having a hard time with this flexible work environment. But there's ways to make that work and keep your talent that you want. One way is to offer flexible work arrangements, but set up reasonable parameters. So maybe it's you need to be in the office 3 days a week and 2 days a week you can work remotely. Or if you know that there's a day or two out of the week that you really need your team together to work on collaborative efforts, maybe it's everybody needs to be in the office on Tuesday and Wednesday, and then you have the flexibility to do things differently. Every company's different, every department's different. So you have to do what works for you and within your culture. But there are ways, and there's lots of articles out there on ways that you can structure this, that you can offer those flexible work arrangements, but set up some parameters so that it's fair for everybody. Realize, and I think this is really hard because my big question for the last few years is who decided that 40 hours a week is what we're supposed to work? I'm sure that was in the industrial age. But I guess we're still in the industrial age. Maybe we're in the creative age. Anyway, I'll have to go do some research on that and report back to you. But this idea that 40 hours a week, 8 hours a day, the reality is what research says is that most people cannot do high quality work more than 5 or 6 hours a day. So there's all kinds of research on physicians and errors. I mean, significant, scary errors that physicians make when they work more than 5 or 6 hours in a day. Most of them work much longer than that. So the same thing happens with us. We're just not as productive. We're not as sharp. And so recognize that sometimes you really just need to focus on that quality of work and not the quantity. Now, FLSA suggests that we have non-exempt employees and exempt employees. So if those of you who are in HR, you have to follow those guidelines. And so for hourly employees, they're still having to clock in, and there's not a lot we can do about that federally. But for your exempt employees, I'm not saying make them or just give everybody a 6-hour day. I'm just saying recognize that some of that time may not be as productive. So just clocking in more hours does not mean that you're getting more productive work. Another thing for those of you who are working in essential worker industries, essential workers have dealt with all the same things that the rest of us have dealt with, plus they've had to be on the front line for everything. And quite honestly, their jobs are not flexible. They have to be available. And so think about what types of rewards are available for those people, because we can't offer them flexibility. So are there other rewards that we can instate or put into place to reward them for all their extra work? And maybe it's extended vacation, maybe it's some time off, whatever that looks like. Reconsider how we handle essential workers and the burden that they've been through as well. The sixth item is to really force a disconnect. We all have these things. We all check our email all day long. Force people that work with you to just disconnect after work, because that's how we start to recover. That's how our brains start to heal, our brains start to recover. They need to be disconnected from work. So give employees permission or even an expectation to recover after work. Don't text them. Don't schedule meetings at 5 o'clock. Don't start sending a bunch of emails and expecting them to respond. And I would even suggest maybe don't even send the email. Draft it, set a timer to send it in the morning, or send it in the morning, just leave it in your drafts, because people feel like they have to respond. So allow people that time and the space to disconnect where possible. And then if you've ever taken one of my classes, you know that I'm a huge fan of Daniel Pink's research on motivation. And a couple of things that really impact motivation for people at work is mastery. And mastery is this idea of learning something new. So is there something new that you can allow your employees to learn? Because that gets people excited about something. It's that little bit of change in the routine. And it could be skills at work, it could be hobbies, but give them the space to explore something new and exciting, because that can create some motivation. Another thing is this idea of creating clarity around where you're going. There's some great research on forward progress increases motivation. So this idea of there's a path I see, and it's clear, we've discussed it. We know what we're all working together, what that common goal is, and we have that very well defined. So just moving forward can actually increase motivation for your employees. And then finally, the biggest driver of motivation, especially for this generation, is just this idea that the work I do matters. So it doesn't matter what industry you're in, what job you're in, everybody serves a purpose for their company. And your goal as an employer is to help those employees see that they matter to the company, they matter to the employees of your company, because all of the companies exist to serve their clients. So how are they serving their clients, and how do they see their purpose, and how they live out that purpose, and emphasizing that purpose, because that's really where people are losing their way. They feel stagnant. They feel like they're not meeting their passion. And a lot of them are going to go pursue passions outside of your work. If you can't provide them that connection to how they're creating passion and purpose in the work that they're doing where they are. So that's all I have. I would love to hear some of your questions, comments, rebuttals, whatever you have for me. So I will stop sharing my screen so that I can see your questions. Okay, so first question is, do you think that the cloud is contributing to people leaving their jobs? And absolutely. I think this idea of I'm just uninspired, I'm feeling stagnant, I feel aimless, I don't really feel like I have any purpose. This is where you're seeing those people say, you know what? I'm just not seeing why I'm here anymore. This is not what makes me excited to get up in the morning and race to work. So it must be that this is the job that I shouldn't be in. That may not be the case. It may just be all this emotional overload. And so as employers, we want to try to shift and try to help people reconnect and revision what that purpose is and how they're serving clients or serving each other. And in some cases, it really was not the right job fit. It's not something that somebody wants to do long term. So then they might shift careers or shift to a different company. I think the challenge will be is helping employees identify, is it because of where I am emotionally, or is it because this really isn't the right job fit for me and it's time for me to go to a different company, or it's just time to take a step back and figure out how I make things work where I am. And so I think that's where you can incorporate coaching with your employees. You can incorporate a lot more conversation with employees. So thank you for that question. It's a great question. What do you see as the long-term implications of this cloud? I wish I had that. See, I can't even think of the words. I'm obviously in a cloud. I wish I had that magic mirror that could tell me what's going to happen in the future. I think that you're going to see this great resignation continue over the next couple of years. I think people will reevaluate things as we get back to a new normal. And then if we have to go back to the old normal, I think you're just going to continue to see this cognitive overload and a lot more burnout. So I do think there will be some long-term implications of that. I think the key as employers is to try to set up ways in our companies that we can help people navigate that. And it's not just going to different trainings on how to be more mindful, although I do think being more mindful would help personally. Sometimes it's literally go take a week off. It's not more training on how to do these things outside of work. It's we're going to give you some time to decompress, to reset, some things like that. But every company has to manage that themselves. So thank you for that. Thank you for that. I've taken on a culture role where I'm in charge of flipping the culture. Yes, that is a huge task. So what do you suggest my first action step should be? So this person's already done an office culture survey, as well as a professional development on identifying their primary skill and how to monetize it. I'd love more ideas. Okay, email me offline because I've got lots of ideas. But I'd say the first thing for culture, as far as where we are today, is to understand what is affecting your employees the most. So you've already done a survey. What are you finding in that survey that says, because culture, culture is so many things. You've got subcultures, you have the culture of, and when we say culture, if you've been in my class, you're going to hear me repeat this again, but this idea that it's, bring your dog to work, and we have free Cokes and snacks and game rooms. That's not culture. The culture is, are people secretive? Are people political? Do people play games? Pay is all about culture. So how do we reward people, and what do we reward, and how do we value people? So understanding those underlying motives and motivations of your employees is a first way to start identifying some of those cultural challenges. But I would really look at as far as, are they feeling burned out? Do they feel like they have the support they need? Do they feel like they want more flexibility or not more flexibility? Start with the things that most people have dealt with for the last year, and then you can start really building on that. So good luck to you, because that's a huge task. All right, so are there companies or industries you see handling the employees' need for flexibility well to mend the COVID cloud? IT is one of them. IT had, 30 years ahead of the rest of us. Silicon Valley has done remote work for years and years. My husband's in the IT industry, and, right now they're trying to hire a bunch of developers. He said that you cannot hire a developer unless you offer remote only work. So they figured it out. Like, I want to work wherever I want. I want to go live in France for a month, but guess what? I can work. Well, maybe you can't go to France right now, but maybe you're just going to go to Florida for the month, and you're going to hang out on the beach, and you're going to code. So I do think the IT industry is decades ahead of other industries in that. So I think we can take a lot of cues from the technology industry. So great question there. What industries, occupations are employees fleeing from, and what positions are they going to? I haven't seen a ton of research on which ones are affected most. So I'm going to make a guess, and then I'll do some research on that and see if I can find out anything. I'm guessing that it's knowledge workers and creative workers, because they are in high demand and they have options. Some of them are also, they've been in great careers for, the last 5 years or so. And this pandemic has really made people step back and reevaluate what they want to do with their life. I have a friend who quit a job as an architect and started a landscape company because he's like, I don't want to sit behind a desk anymore. It's hard work to be in a landscape company right now. And he's seeing some of the things that go along with that. He's like, I just want to get my hands dirty. I have another friend who quit a job in IT to be a missionary. So there's a lot of people reevaluating. So I think that knowledge sector is one of the ones that's going to be hit the hardest. And then, do you feel more productive working from home? Is this my boss? Maybe not. So so this person says, I feel there are fewer interruptions. So I'm going to say here, it depends. If you're asking me if I feel more productive, I'll also say it depends. It depends, because right now I can hear my son upstairs playing video games, and he's banging on the floor. And so I'm a little bit distracted. And I really want to text him right now, but I'm scared to pull up my text messages. So I'm a little distracted, but generally speaking, when my kids are in school, I love working from home one morning a week, because I can knock out my email. I can knock out some big projects, because I'm a talker. I go to work and I'll go talk to somebody. And then, an hour later, it's like, oh, I need to go do like real work. So for me, that flexibility to work from home to knock out some big tasks when I'm not distracted is great. For some people, they just have too many distractions at home. They constantly are thinking, what needs to be done around here? Do I need to put in some laundry? Do I need to, or they just, get distracted with something that they'd rather do than work. So my answer is almost always, it depends. But I think people can be productive at home and some people can't. All right. Any other questions? All right, I waited my full 10 seconds to see if there's any more questions. So if we don't have any more questions, then I want to make sure that you know about our next session that is on August 12th, and it's also from 12 to 1. And it's a session called Stepping Outside Our Comfort Zones, Business and Racism, and that's going to be led by Dr. Ray Eldridge, who's our dean, and one of our Dean's Board members, Dwayne Scott. And I think this will be an hour very well spent, and so I really encourage you to register for that. And if there's no other questions, then I hope you guys have a great afternoon, and I hope that we've left you with a few tips to handle the COVID cloud for both you and your employees. Have a great rest of your day.